My MIL told everyone she'd leave both her houses to my sister-in-law, saying, "She's the heart of this family." My wife and I got cut out completely, so her dad quietly moved the deed over to me instead, right before the will was read. I never thought a casual garden party could be the beginning of the end. But that night, listening to my mother-in-law, Vivian, casually sign away Chloe's future with a glass of white wine in her hand, I felt my entire world shift. I knew, with a cold certainty, that nothing would ever be the same. The air that evening was thick with the scent of jasmine and silent judgment. At 33, I'd built a quiet life with my wife, Chloe. We're both teachers, living in a modest home outside Denver. Our weekends are a predictable dance of grading papers and debating takeout. Nothing flashy, just peaceful. Predictable. But chaos has a way of finding you, even when you do everything right. Vivian, Chloe's mother, is a force. She doesn't need to raise her voice, her elegance and icy meticulousness do the talking. She's always been polite to me, but it's the kind of politeness that feels like a constant, silent evaluation. I'm just a guy who loves her daughter, not a lawyer or surgeon like her friend's sons-in-law. I've always known I don't quite make the cut in her eyes. Chloe has an older sister, Scarlett. And Scarlett? She's everything Vivian ever wanted. Loud, dramatic, thrives on attention, turning mundane stories into Shakespearean monologues. She's married money twice, now floats through life with a wellness brand, posting inspirational quotes by infinity pools. Vivian eats it up, worshipping Scarlett as this golden figure who can do no wrong. Meanwhile, my Chloe, stable, kind, grounded, barely registers. I first truly saw this imbalance 2 years ago, at Thanksgiving. Vivian, as always, hosted, assigning seats at her antique dining table like a formal assembly. We just sat down when she raised her glass. To Scarlett, she announced, the heart of this family. Not Chloe, not her husband, David, who was elbow-deep in mashed potatoes serving everyone. Just Scarlett, who'd shown up 2 hours late after posting turkey selfies. I saw the sting in Chloe's eyes. She just offered a weak smile, sipped her wine. That night, she went straight to bed, silent. I lay awake for hours, the silence between us heavier than anything Vivian had said aloud. I tried to tell myself it was just favoritism. Not everything needed to be a war. But the little comments piled up. At Chloe's birthday, Vivian gave Scarlett a bracelet, just because. When we announced we were trying for a baby, Vivian vaguely smiled, then changed the subject to Scarlett's new skincare line. She actually asked Chloe if she planned to take time off to focus on something more feminine, like nesting, then praised Scarlett's business-savvy independence in the same breath. But the real kicker happened last spring. Vivian owns 2 houses, her main residence and a lake house, a family heirloom. Chloe and I spent summers there when we first dated. She dreamed of raising our future kids by that lake. It was her happy place, ours even. Inheritance was never something we thought about. We weren't after anything. It was during one of Vivian's garden parties when things shifted from cold shoulders to open declarations. Chloe had a migraine, resting inside, so I was helping Vivian set up the dessert table. I overheard her chatting with friends, wine glasses clinking, that distinct wine mom laugh. Someone must have asked about estate planning because Vivian, without a flicker of hesitation, said, "Oh, both properties will go to Scarlett, of course. She's the heart of this family, the backbone. It just makes sense." I froze. She said it with such calm certainty, like it was already signed, sealed, delivered. Like Chloe didn't even factor in. I pretended to focus on the lemon bars, but my hands were shaking. Later that night, I told Chloe. She just sat there, knees hugged to her chest on our couch, staring at the floor, like she'd already known. Maybe she had. Maybe she'd known for years her mother never truly saw her. But hearing it spoken aloud, so bluntly, hit a nerve neither of us expected. We never confronted Vivian. What was the point? She would have denied it, or worse, just nodded and said it was her decision. Still, that moment stuck with me like a splinter. It wasn't about the property. It was the message, you don't matter. You're invisible. But the universe has a funny way of tipping things sideways. A few months later, something happened none of us saw coming, not even Vivian. While she was playing Queen of the Garden parties, rehearsing her next toast to Scarlett, someone else was quietly watching from the sidelines. Someone with the power to flip the script. Her husband, Chloe's father, David. And he had plans of his own. I wish I could say things simmered down after that garden party. That Vivian realized how much she'd hurt Chloe, or that we all started communicating better, like some miracle family therapy breakthrough. But no. Things got worse. Subtler at first, like a slow poison, but worse all the same. Looking back, I think Vivian did it deliberately, testing how far she could push Chloe before she snapped. It began with the lake house. That place was sacred to Chloe. Her childhood summers were built around that cabin, campfires, catching frogs, David teaching her to skip stones. I'd heard the stories so many times I could recite them. It was the one place untouched by Vivian's icy standards. But in late spring, Scarlett started dropping hints in the family group chat, photos of decor magazines, Pinterest links for lake house inspiration, captions like future plans. Chloe asked her directly what she meant. Scarlett replied. Like it was the most obvious thing, "Oh, Mom said I could start redecorating this summer. She wants it to feel more modern, less, rustic bunkhouse chic." I watched Chloe reread the message 3 times, hoping she'd misunderstood. She hadn't. Vivian had just quietly decided it would go to Scarlett, letting her rip away Chloe's memories, one throw pillow at a time. When Chloe called her mom, the conversation lasted under 2 minutes. Vivian confirmed it plainly, Scarlett has better taste, and she's the one who entertains guests. You never really use the place anyway. It was like someone had kicked her in the chest. I found her curled up in the hallway after that call, eyes red, phone dangling. I sat with her for over an hour. There was nothing to say. After that, we stopped going to the lake house entirely. Scarlett and Owen took over, of course, posting filtered photos of their wine nights on the deck, installing a fire pit, getting rid of the old rocking chairs Chloe's grandfather built by hand. Then came Vivian's birthday in July. A huge brunch at some fancy rooftop spot in the city, the kind with $24 pancakes. Chloe and I arrived early, as always, with a thoughtful gift, a framed, restored photo of Vivian's parents from an old album. Chloe had even written a note. Vivian barely glanced at it. "Oh, that's sweet," she said, setting it aside without reading. Then Scarlett waltzed in, 20 minutes late, sunglasses indoors, carrying a designer gift bag. Vivian lit up like Christmas morning. They hugged like they hadn't seen each other in years, even though they FaceTimed twice a day. Scarlett's gift, a monogrammed silk robe. Vivian paraded it around like a trophy. I saw Chloe's fingers tighten around her mimosa glass. That day, I noticed something different in Chloe. Not just sadness. There was a tightening behind her eyes, like a wire pulled taut. I recognized that look. It was the same one I had the day I overheard Vivian dismissing her like a footnote. Things came to a head not long after. Vivian decided to host a legacy dinner, her actual term for a formal gathering where she'd go over her will and estate plans, so there would be no confusion. Dramatic, yes, but Vivian was always theatrical when it came to appearances. She invited just immediate family, Chloe, Scarlett, their husbands, and their father, David. David. He's a quiet man, a retired engineer with a love for woodworking and black coffee. Vivian steamrolled most conversations, and he let her. But he watched. I'd seen it. And something about the way he looked at Chloe, soft, understanding, told me he saw more than he let on. Anyway, the legacy dinner. It was set up in Vivian's dining room like a corporate presentation. Printed folders at each seat, a bullet-pointed outline inside. That woman could turn Sunday lunch into a TED Talk. She stood at the head of the table. "As you all know," she began, "I've worked hard to build and maintain this family's legacy. It's important to me that my values are carried on." I saw Chloe glance at me, nervous. I squeezed her hand under the table. Vivian continued, outlining various small things, artwork, jewelry, china, most already earmarked for Scarlett. Then came the big one. As for the properties, she said, pausing dramatically, the main house and the lake house will both go to Scarlett. Just like that. Chloe didn't speak. Neither did I. Vivian didn't even look our way, like we weren't in the room. But David. David looked directly at me, then at Chloe. His eyes lingered. He didn't say anything, but something passed between us. A moment, an understanding. Scarlett, of course, was beaming. Wow, Mom. I mean, thank you. I'll take good care of them, she practically preened. Vivian raised her wine glass. To legacy, she said. I didn't toast. Neither did Chloe. The days after that dinner were hard. Chloe barely spoke. She still went to work, graded papers, made dinner. But there was a heaviness to her movements, like she was underwater. I tried to cheer her up, coffee runs, movie nights, I even wrote her a letter, telling her how proud I was of her strength, slipping it into her work bag. She never mentioned it. I found it a week later, unopened, under a granola bar. That's when I hit my own low point. Late at night, Chloe in bed, I sat alone on the couch, laptop open, staring at our joint bank account. I started thinking about all the things I wasn't. Not the man her mother wanted her to marry. Not rich, powerful, or charming like Owen. I didn't own a business or throw big parties. I was just a guy who taught English lit, who believed in thank you notes and holding doors open. And somehow, that had never felt smaller. I sat on the porch with a blanket and cheap bourbon, watching the sky. My mind wouldn't stop spinning, not just about Chloe, Vivian, or Scarlett, but about me. Was I passively letting life happen? I realized something awful. I'd let Vivian get to me. I'd internalized her judgments, started believing, subconsciously, that maybe I wasn't enough. That scared me more than anything. So, I decided to do something. The next morning, I dug up an old college notebook, full of half-finished essays and quotes. At the back was a list, things I want to do before I'm 40. Learn to make perfect lasagna. Drive cross-country. Get a tattoo. And one that stood out, write something real, something that matters. I didn't know what that meant, but it was time. I needed something that belonged to me, something no one could strip away or devalue for not being flashy enough. I started writing again, not for work, just for me. Late at night, at the kitchen table, scribbling out scenes, stories, essays, fragments of things I didn't know were inside me. Slowly, piece by piece, I began to feel like myself again. Not the judged, dismissed version, but the one who dreamed of writing books. One night, I showed Chloe a story. I almost didn't. I was scared it would just bounce off her. Like everything else lately. But she read it. When she finished, she looked up, tears in her eyes. This is beautiful, she whispered. It was the first time in weeks I saw her truly look at me. Things didn't magically fix themselves, but something shifted. Chloe started coming to the table again, literally and metaphorically. Coffee in the mornings, walks after dinner. One night, reading by the fireplace, she reached for my hand. I've been trying so hard to pretend it doesn't matter, she said quietly. But it does. What she did. It broke something in me. I know, I said. I don't want to let her win. I don't want to carry this forever. You don't have to, I said, feeling that envelope burning a hole in my desk drawer upstairs. But still, I waited. Rebuilding is slow. You don't wake up with a new foundation. You lay it brick by brick. But I was laying bricks. I submitted stories to literary journals. Polite rejections, one glowing almost, then a short piece published in a small online magazine. It didn't pay, but it meant something. Chloe printed it out, pinned it to the fridge. You're a published author now, she grinned. And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. Around that time, Vivian announced another family dinner. To celebrate Scarlett's big business milestone, some podcast deal, new skincare line. I didn't keep track. But something about the timing made my stomach tighten. I couldn't shake the feeling this wasn't just about celebrating Scarlett. Vivian was planning something. She always was. Sure enough, the invitation came with a note. It will also be a good time to formally discuss any final updates to the family estate, just so we're all aligned. I knew what that meant. Vivian would make it official, put it on paper, hand out copies, make a spectacle of it so no one could question her. I showed the note to Chloe. She stared at it, then said, "I don't want to go." "You don't have to," I said. But I saw the war in her eyes. The part of her that wanted to walk away clean versus the part that needed to stand in that room and be seen, even if it hurt, even if it was just to remind herself she existed. "I need to," she said finally. "Even if it's just once." I nodded. We spent days in a weird limbo, dreading what was coming. But I wasn't just waiting anymore. I was preparing. Because David had given me the deed weeks ago. Because Chloe was stronger than Vivian would ever understand. And because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's simply showing up when they think they've erased you. I pulled the deed out of my desk. Made copies. Placed them in a neat folder, tucked it into my jacket. As the dinner approached, I kept thinking about walking into that room together. Calm, quiet, steady. While Vivian had no idea what was about to hit her. She thought this dinner would be the final stamp on her carefully crafted legacy. But she forgot one thing: the heart of a family isn't something you choose. It's something that shows up even after you try to bury it. The moment she tried to erase Chloe from her story, that's the moment she started losing control of the narrative. I didn't sleep much the night before. Not nerves, exactly. Something colder, heavier, like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall would hurt, but finally having the parachute to control the descent. For the first time in months, I wasn't walking into that house defenseless. I wasn't just someone's son-in-law or the quiet teacher in the corner. I was the man holding the real legacy of Vivian's so-called empire. And she didn't have a clue. I sat at the kitchen table long after Chloe had gone to bed, reviewing the folder. 2 crisp copies of the deed, both clearly showing David had transferred ownership of the lake house to me. Not to Scarlett, not to the part of the family, to me. The man she dismissed, disregarded, quietly tried to erase. Each time I read it, a storm built in my chest. It wasn't anger. I'd moved past that. It was something more focused, like the final piece clicking into a lock that had been jammed for years. This wasn't about a dramatic explosion or vengeance. It was about truth. About Chloe. About reclaiming something that should have never been taken. And for that, timing mattered. Vivian's dinner was at 6 p.m. sharp. Everything she did was sharply scheduled. She'd sent an itinerary: 6 o'clock, cocktails. 6:30, dinner. 7:15, estate presentation and announcement. 7:30, dessert. I could practically hear her voice in the bullet points. I knew 7:15 was the moment. That was the window. She would unveil her plans, pass out smug little packets, maybe even toast Scarlett again. That's when I'd make my move. But this wasn't just my plan. I had someone else on my side. The one person Vivian always underestimated, David. He'd called a few days before. Brief, as usual, just enough to confirm he was still on board. "I'll be there," he'd said. "Let her say what she wants. We'll wait." That was all I needed. He didn't want theatrics. He didn't want a war. He just wanted fairness, quiet justice. And so did I. When the day finally came, I dressed with more care than usual. Navy blazer, white shirt, dark jeans, my cleanest boots. I tucked the folder inside my inner jacket pocket like it was a weapon. A truth bomb, locked and loaded. Chloe looked radiant but distant. She wore a soft maroon dress I hadn't seen in years, one she'd worn to job interviews. A strong, bold color. But her eyes were still guarded. "Are you sure you're okay with this?" I asked her at the front door. She looked down at her hands, then back at me. I'm not going for her, she said. I'm going for me. I nodded. Then let's go. The ride to Vivian's house was quiet. Familiar neighborhoods, driven 100 times. It felt strange, surreal, like we were headed toward a verdict, not a dinner. When we arrived, the driveway was lined with high-end cars. Owen's sleek black SUV, Scarlett's luxury crossover, wrapped in hideous matte rose gold, taking up 2 spaces. Vivian's house looked the same, pristine, curated, emotionally sterile. The kind of place where no one ever really lives, they just exist to impress. We rang the bell. The door swung open. Darling, Vivian greeted us with a wide smile, her eyes quickly scanning our outfits. You both look so polished. The compliment sounded like mild surprise. Thanks for having us, I said coolly. She led us to the back patio where cocktails were served. The air smelled of rosemary and overpriced cheese. I spotted Scarlett, perched on a lounge chair, laughing a little too loud. Owen next to her, talking stocks. David wasn't outside yet. I felt Chloe tense beside me as Vivian led her to the group. I watched her switch into her polite daughter face, nodding, smiling, asking Scarlett about podcast numbers as if she hadn't cried herself to sleep last week watching old lake house videos. I stayed near the bar cart, sipping a whiskey neat, my eyes scanning the room, my mind counting down. 6:10, 10 minutes in. Vivian floated from guest to guest like a CEO. She wasn't wearing a crown, but she might as well have been. At 6:30 sharp, she ushered everyone inside. Dinner was served in the same dining room where she'd held her legacy toast last year. Long. Oak table, silver candlesticks, handwritten place cards. We were seated across from Scarlett and Owen. I made conversation with David, who'd slipped in during cocktails, greeting me with a simple nod. His eyes, as always, said more than his mouth. Dinner passed in a blur. Roasted duck, wild rice pilaf, steamed asparagus, elegant and tasteless. Vivian kept the conversation flowing, steering it between topics that orbited Scarlett like satellites, her business, her latest interview, her upcoming retreat in Santorini. I watched Chloe's face. She was holding together, but just barely. Then, at 7:15, almost to the second, Vivian stood up and tapped her wine glass. Everyone, she smiled. Thank you so much for joining us. Before dessert, I wanted to take a moment to formally go over a few estate matters. I know, it's a bit serious, but it's important. She turned to a side table and picked up a stack of white folders, neatly labeled. Chloe sat up straighter. I felt her hand slide into mine under the table. I gave it a gentle squeeze. Vivian passed the folders out, one by one. These are updated documents outlining my estate plan. I've spoken to my attorney and made everything as clear as possible to avoid confusion. Scarlett was beaming. Owen looked smug. David sat still, hands folded. And of course, Vivian continued, as many of you know, the main house and the lake house will both go to Scarlett. She's shown such dedication to family, and she's the one truly carrying on our traditions. Chloe's grip on my hand tightened. I saw David shift slightly in his chair. Not much, but enough. And I know this might surprise some of you, Vivian added, her voice softening in a faux humble way, but I've always followed my heart when it comes to these decisions. And my heart tells me that Scarlett is the true legacy of this family. She smiled at Chloe, not apologetically, but almost pitying. That's when I reached inside my jacket. I pulled out the folder, set it calmly on the table. I have something I'd like to add, I said. All heads turned to me. Vivian blinked. Liam, this isn't, I held up a hand, not rudely, just firmly. I won't take much time, but since we're all discussing transparency and legacy. I slid the folder across the table to Chloe. She looked at me, confused. I nodded once. She opened it. Her eyes scanned the page, then again, then they widened. She looked at me, then at her father. He gave her the smallest smile. What is this? Vivian demanded, voice clipped. Chloe's voice shook as she read it aloud. It's the deed to the lake house. Transferred to Liam weeks ago. Signed by Dad. The silence that followed was suffocating. Vivian's jaw tightened. Her posture stiffened. That's not possible, she said sharply. David, what is she talking about? David didn't look at her. He looked at Chloe. You were always meant to have it, he said quietly. I just made sure of it. Scarlett shot up from her seat. Wait, what? That's my lake house. You said, Mom, I said what your mother told me to say, David said simply. But I kept my name on that deed for a reason. And now it's Liam's. Vivian's voice cracked just once. You went behind my back. I protected our daughter, he said. Something you stopped doing a long time ago. The storm hadn't fully hit yet, but the clouds had cracked. And for the first time in years, Chloe wasn't shrinking under Vivian's gaze. She was rising. Vivian had always been good at regaining control. She could twist a conversation with one carefully chosen phrase, reel the spotlight back to herself with an arch of an eyebrow. But that night, for the first time I'd ever seen, she was scrambling. The room was dead silent as the truth hung in the air, thick, electric, undeniable. Vivian's face was pale, but her voice snapped like dry ice. You went behind my back, she hissed at David again, sharper now, more brittle. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look ashamed. He just leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady and calm. You stopped listening a long time ago, Vivian, he said. So, I stopped asking. Scarlett stood frozen beside her chair, her hands twitching like she didn't know what to do with them. Her eyes darted between Vivian and David, then to Chloe, then to me, like she was waiting for someone, anyone, to tell her this wasn't real, that the rug hadn't just been yanked out from under her. But it had. I looked at Chloe. She was still holding the deed in both hands, her eyes locked on the paper like it might vanish. I don't think she'd processed it fully yet. That the place she thought had been ripped from her had been hers this whole time. That someone had believed in her enough to fight for it behind the scenes. That after all the years of being treated like an afterthought, she had been the one chosen. Vivian finally broke the silence again. This is insulting, David. You undermine me. You embarrassed me in my own home. You're tearing this family apart. He shook his head. No, Vivian. You did that. You did that every time you told Chloe she wasn't enough. Every time you made her invisible. I just gave her what you were never going to. Scarlett snapped then. This is crazy, she shouted. You can't just give it away. Mom said it was mine. I looked at her, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw the cracks. The tears threatening to spill, the disbelief. She was so used to winning by default, it never occurred to her that the finish line might move without her permission. I'm sorry, Scarlett, I said, and I meant it in a way, but it's not yours. And it never was. She turned to her mother. Do something. Vivian's lips pressed into a thin line, fury radiating off her. This is not over, she said coldly. I'll take this to court if I have to. David raised an eyebrow. It's been legally transferred. The deed is notarized. Go ahead. Vivian stared at him, her nostrils flaring. You're siding with them over your own wife. He took a deep breath. I'm not picking sides. I'm doing what's right. You made your decisions. I'm making mine. I could tell Vivian wanted to keep arguing, to claw back the conversation and paint herself as the wounded one. But she must have realized there was no audience left. The room wasn't reacting anymore. Even Owen, who'd been so smug earlier, was looking down at his plate like he wanted to melt into it. And Chloe. Oh, Chloe. She stood up slowly, carefully, like a weight had lifted. And when she spoke, her voice was clear. Calm. Almost too calm. I've spent my whole life trying to be seen by you, she said to her mother. I thought if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, made myself small enough, maybe one day I'd be enough for you. Vivian opened her mouth, but Chloe kept going. But I realize now you were never going to see me. Not really. You only see what reflects back at you, and I stopped reflecting you a long time ago. Chloe, Vivian said, stepping toward her. This isn't about, Chloe held up a hand, and Vivian froze. No more speeches. No more toasts. No more pretending like I'm lucky just to be invited to your table. She looked around the room, then back at Vivian. You've spent years building this perfect picture of a family, but it's fake. And I'm done being a prop in your play. Then she turned to David, her voice softening. Thank you, Dad, for seeing me. For this. He gave her a small smile. I should have done more sooner. Chloe stepped back, took my hand, and looked at me like she finally saw the version of herself I'd always seen. Strong. Steady. Worthy. We left after that. No dessert, no final toast, no apologies. Just the sound of Vivian calling after us, her voice brittle and hollow, as we walked out the front door together. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin, crisp and clean. I could feel Chloe's hand trembling in mine, but she didn't let go. We got into the car, sat there for a long moment in silence. Then Chloe laughed. It wasn't loud, just a small, incredulous laugh, like she didn't quite believe any of it had happened. I keep waiting for her to come running out and demand the house back, she said. She can try, I replied, reaching into my pocket and pulling out a second copy of the deed. But it's ours. She looked at it again, then at me. I didn't know he'd do that, she whispered. I didn't think anyone would ever choose me over her. I leaned over and kissed her forehead. You didn't have to be chosen. You were already enough. She nodded, blinking fast. I want to go to the lake house, she said suddenly. Right now. So, we did. We drove through the night, headlights carving through the darkness like we were chasing something sacred. By the time we got there, the moon was high over the water, casting everything in silver. We stood on the porch together, the same porch where Scarlett had filmed her smug little Instagram video. Now just a memory that no longer had power. Chloe turned the key in the door and stepped inside. It still smelled faintly like cedar and old fabric. Some of the new renovations Scarlett made were visible, modern lamps, updated counters, but the soul of the place remained. We stood there for a long time. Then Chloe walked into the living room, sat on the couch, and let out a deep, full breath. It sounded like peace. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from that dinner was seismic. Vivian, unsurprisingly, tried damage control. Long-winded emails, half apologies wrapped in passive aggression, trying to guilt Chloe into reconsidering. She called David repeatedly, begging him to fix this, but he didn't budge. Scarlett unfollowed us on every social platform, posting vague quotes about betrayal and snakes in the grass, then quietly took down all her lake house content. David, meanwhile, started spending more weekends at the cabin, sometimes just for the day, sometimes overnight. He and Chloe began rebuilding something I thought had long been lost. Not just a father-daughter bond, but something gentler, steadier, something real. Chloe and I decided to keep the house just as it was. We didn't undo Scarlett's updates. We didn't strip it down and start fresh. Instead, we layered our life over it. Photos of our own, little souvenirs from trips, cozy blankets, mugs with mismatched handles. We made it ours. One morning, drinking coffee on the porch, Chloe said, "You know, I don't think she'll ever admit she was wrong." "I know," I said. "But that doesn't matter anymore." And she was right. The revenge hadn't come from cruelty. It didn't need shouting or grand gestures. It came from reclaiming what was stolen. From stepping back into the light. From proving to everyone, including ourselves, that being overlooked doesn't mean being lesser. That quiet strength is strength. And that being the heart of the family doesn't mean making the most noise. It means being the one who keeps showing up, no matter how many times they try to write you out of the story. As the sun rose over the lake, warming the old wooden planks beneath our feet, I realized something simple and powerful. We weren't just the footnotes anymore. We were the authors now. And this time, we were writing the ending. What would you have done if you were in David's shoes?